Hello, everyone. So my name's Javon Kiddo. I'm going to be the moderator for today. I'm just going to ask each panelist to briefly introduce themselves. So I'll start with you, Malcolm.
Well, good afternoon. My name is Malcolm McPherson. I'm a lawyer by trade. I have Mi'kmaq heritage through my grandmother, who was from Gaspé, Quebec. And I run a busy Indigenous practice across mostly Western Canada, so BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and now Manitoba. Pleasure to see you all today.
Ani, my name is Duke Pelche. I'm from Wikwemko and Cedar Territory, and my current work is representing the Anishinaabe Nation as the Children's Commissioner for all the children of the Anishinaabe Nation, as well as the principal spokesperson on behalf of the Robinson-Huron Treaty.
Dan se kakiao kapesagi wait siga sud maskuchisik num sikopa. Nananaskaman mamohtawi ma mi agi scout notes. Agamin naskaman kakiao epe totieg. My name is Stephen Buffalo. I'm from the Samson Cree Nation. I currently the president and CEO of the Indian Resource Council of Canada. I want to acknowledge the creator for today, acknowledge the traditional territory Huron of the Algonquin and the Anishinaabe, and to welcome everyone here today.
Hello, my name is Jennifer Leywitz, also known as Jennifer L. online. I'm a proud member of George Gordon First Nation in southern Saskatchewan, and I work for an Indigenous consultation firm by the name of War Shield. So what we do is we work between industry and government and represent a bunch of nations and all of their issues that they have, and yeah.
Thank you all, and thank you, Buff, for the land acknowledgement. I appreciate that. So we're gonna kick this off and kind of ask, what does the current political environment feel or look like for you? And so I'm always going to start with the ladies, Jen, and it could be something personally, professionally, within community. But what does it feel and look like for you today?
Ooh, that's an interesting question, especially for anybody that follows me online. It's starting to get more volatile for sure. I think this year's Canada Strong and Free Conference is really emphasizing that it's going to get worse. The vicious cycle is going to continue. The attacks are going to ramp up, especially when it comes to defending conservatism in this country. So right now, I would say that we're kind of at a crossroads of defending our values and where we stand, and just making sure that we're being authentic about it.
Thank you, Jen. Anyone?
Obviously, being in the oil and gas sector, energy is critical to our First Nations in the West. And the Indian Resource Council advocates for the First Nations with all levels of government as long as industry. Industry has really opened the door, to partnerships and doing things better. Given the current context and where we're at, we're seeing a definite struggle with some of the federal policies coming into play. Bill C-69, Bill C-48. Can't talk about oil and gas bill. Those are things that are really paternalistic and still having that colonization. And the key concept thing here is no consultation with the grassroots communities that produce oil and gas, that have invested interests in the oil and gas sector. And going forward, we're obviously trying to establish Indigenous right. And if you haven't figured it out yet, go down the street. That's the best Indian casino Canada has ever produced, is the Supreme Court of Canada. It is paying out for First Nations because governments keep trying to uproot our rights. And if I'm in this room, I'm going to tell you something, is that you have to accept it. The word consultation, the better word is relationship, going forward, right? And there's a lot of things I can take up in this whole space here. But energy is crucial. Oil and gas, primarily in Western Canada. When we see billions of dollars made from Alberta, and it comes to Ottawa, and a large portion goes to Quebec, I myself, from a Treaty 6 member, have an issue with that. If we can utilize that money in Alberta for our communities, opposed to going to a government that won't be part of our nation, I'd like to see some changes there. But ultimately, yeah, with everything that's coming from that we're dealing with right now, it's handcuffed and it's being forced upon us, and that's the hard part. When our leader of this nation told us that there's no bigger relationship than with the Indigenous people, I bought it. I thought, okay, cool, because previous government was hard. It was straight out, no, 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 you know, and then this guy comes along and says, well, you know, big relationship here. So it's been kind of upsetting a little bit. But at the end of the day, you know, we're here, we want to talk about these things, and again, you know, I don't think the story of out west and the success of some of the indigenous nations, along with industry and now some of our provincial governments, the relationships are getting better. And so I'm optimistic in that context.
Thank you. So don't worry, we're all not Albertans up here, but on the resource First Nation perspective, Alberta First Nations have a lot of resource development and do really well in that space. And so already like Onion Lake, Fort McKay, Maskwacis, you know, have that kind of resource, right? But other nations don't. Not everyone has those resources under there. So I'm curious from the Conservatives, where of areas of collaboration. We already saw our future Prime Minister speak about, you know, resource revenue sharing, and so I want to know what that means to you know, some of you, what that means to you, especially if you come from a community that doesn't have massive resources on your lands. It's a commitment, so hold them to it. So talk about it.
So like me, I can jump in there. I guess
Yeah.
one of the first things I think about is, as Stephen has related, is I remain optimistic, and I do believe that energy comes in many different types of forms. And I think one of the most important ones is establishing energy towards building relations. I think that's the most important aspect. The Conservative government under Harper provided an apology to some of the legacy issues that continue to plague our communities, our children, and likely our grandchildren. But without establishing relationships that are important to identify and address some of the systemic issues that plague our communities and plague the systems of governance, as well as having an opportunity to restore jurisdictions to allow for our communities to properly be resourced and address the many issues that our younger children continue to grapple with. We will not be in a position to truly become partners in economic ventures because the relationships are some of the things that are hindering our ability to communicate with each other. And I'll just prove a case in point. There was a full room here 10 minutes ago, and now yourselves, I have to applaud you for taking the time to actually be here because you are meant to be here. So I applaud you for that. So that's really my message is the relationships do have to be restored. They do have to be meaningful conversations, and they have to be at every sector. Miigwech.
Yeah, no, a great answer. And I just I would add, and I guess I'll put a bit of a legal lens to this, but resource revenue sharing is, in my view, it's critically important, is really the next frontier that needs to be sort of collectively overcome. It's important to the nations, also important to Canada, right? The collective. If you look back at some of the case law, you know, one of the big decisions was the Delgamuukw decision, and that one talked about, and that was just to orient you, northwest British Columbia. It was like Wet'suwet'en, Gitxsan area, so the Hazelton Mountain Range. And what the court there talked about is the inescapable economic component to title. So that was really early days, 1997, 1998. Now you fast forward to the Chilcotin decision, right? Went from that to outright title, right? So they got recognized that about just shy of about 500,000 acres of land is actually titled Chilcotin land. So the reason I bring that up is to point out that you know, the courts, the Supreme Court of Canada, the highest law of the land, recognizes that there's more than one owner on title, if I could frame it that way. Or another analogy I like to use is there's more than one landlord, right? And right now, all the rents are going to the Crown. And then it's sort of going through big bureaucracy, right, through the Indian Act, and it's not very efficiently, that's the nicest way I could put it, trickling down. It's not trickling down as it should. And that's a big problem because the nations, right, they've got housing to contend with, they've got you know, water they can't drink, there's infrastructure that needs to be built. And, you know, if you look at the federal government, guess what? All the MPs that we've seen, they all get paid to show up, right? You look at the, you know, MLAs, the provinces, they all get paid, right, to represent and to work with budgets, and same with the municipalities. So it's not right. You've got these communities that are, you know, in some instances, as Giovanna said, in remote parts of Canada, right? Not everybody can be in the land of milk and honey, the Okanagan or Vancouver area or Toronto area, where it's pretty easy to get business moving and revenues flowing. So to circle back, yeah, it's going to be critically important for there to be a conversation, and I hope our future Prime Minister, Poilievre, will sit down with the nations and work out a deal on the resource revenue sharing front so that Canada can unite instead of dividing in this tribalistic way. That's to also circle back, Jovan, to your first question. How's it feeling? Doesn't feel like the Canada that I was born into.
Yeah, thank you.
You know, for sure, you know, people have to understand, you know, being under the Indian Act is not a nice place. Communism exists in Canada under the Indian Act. You know, guidance counselors don't tell high school students, you know what, I want you to go be a bureaucrat in Ottawa to tell those Indians what to do. That's not, you know, the Indian Act is so, it strangles. And it doesn't meet the current needs of our people. Our land bases aren't growing. And we lost our land because of a treaty we thought we agreed. You know, there's agreement. So to find a way to get away from that system we have to look at resource revenue sharing. Canada wants these critical minerals. Guess what? They're in our traditional territory. And if you do not have that relationship with the nations that are affected, it's going to be a tough go. Again, down the road, there's that casino I'm talking about called the Supreme Court. But at the end of the day, when there's partnerships, people are working, companies are growing, Indigenous nations are trying to really lift themselves out of poverty. You know, go spend 10 days in a community, Indigenous community, and you tell me, is that a good quality of life? I know there's critics here that really want to oppose in First Nation development and economic development. You know, sometimes that old way of thinking is still prevalent, and it still comes out every now and then. And I think if our new Prime Minister is going to move forward, he's got to stop taking advice from people that provide that type of advice. Because I'm sick of it. You know, the colonialism, the paternalism, and especially the racism. You know, giving us a chance, and we'll show you, we'll do it. You know, we've shown the time and time again that First Nations can take care of themselves. You know, strong leaderships, but we need that partnership. We need that partnership with the Crown. We need that partnership with the provinces. You know, there's this thing called jurisdiction, and it's all in question. And I know even our Premier, which you guys probably heard today, is sounding really positive and everything, but she's still scared about jurisdiction of First Nations. And if we look at resource revenue sharing, guess what? We control our own destiny. We control ourselves. And with all the resources that are coming from Alberta, and you have to acknowledge that when I couldn't sleep for 5 days when our Minister of Energy told me Alberta's sending $22 billion and 13 is going to Quebec. I could not sleep 3 days because I look at what are the possibilities our communities could do with that. We can fix our housing, we can fix our water, we can take care of a lot of the social pathologies which you see and read about every day. You know, am I optimistic? I have to be, because it has to get better. You know, it's about living in harmony with the land, living in harmony together for this nation. And then everyone, when our communities do well, the municipalities do well. When the municipalities do well, the province does well. And when the province does well, the country does well. And when I'm just kidding.
And I just want to just add to that, just talk about the Indigenous advantage, right? So we've heard a lot about, resource extraction and basically the logjam, if I could call it that. Permits are not getting issued in a timely way. There's a lot of sort of bureaucracies in place. And as a result, Canada's falling behind, right, in terms of its GDP, in terms of its, productivity. We heard that. multiple times over the course of the past few days. So we're at a crossroads, and you know, when the Indigenous communities of Canada hold the key to helping resolve that. I can give you some examples. If you look at mining, they're mining away in the Yukon. Why? Because the nations got together and they made it happen. Yes, there's opposition. Yes, there's a number of folks that you know, write to the regulators, say, you know, there should be no mines, but they get together and they're pragmatic. You look at the Vancouver area, right? Where's all the real estate getting developed? All on Indigenous lands. Look at Alberta, right? Where are the carbon hubs all going? On reserve or you know, the core traditional territories of the nation. So contrary to what you might read in the papers or what you might hear at the proverbial water cooler, is that the nations are very pragmatic and they're interested in responsible development on the reserves and in the territories. And that's why I referenced the Indigenous advantage, and I believe that the nations are going to be playing a key role in Canada's economic future.
Thank you, guys. And I think the key points you can take away from is relationships important. You know, you're hearing from a past longtime chief, but also someone that put his hat in the ring for the other team in provincial politics, right? And so, but we won't hold it against him. We still invited him today because he's swayed the other side. But I think what he would also say to you is that he ran for a reason, not necessarily for a color or for a party, right? And then very pro-resource revenue sharing. I think all nations collectively feel that. But jurisdiction. And so I think we heard Premier Smith say this morning, you know, Prime Minister, stay in your corner and not let me run mine, right? And First Nations have that same opinion. This is their jurisdiction. And what the Conservatives did in the past is had a top-down approach. You know, the Harper government passed the First Nations Transparency Act, imposed it on First Nations without really doing much engagement. It was just forced upon them, understanding the reasons why. You know, we're not going to get too much into that. But let's talk about areas of concerns. And so, again, I'll just defer to this morning. Premier Smith talked about parental rights. I mean, First Nations have a historical history with governments telling them how to parent and getting involved in their parental rights. But we also have things like affordability, mental health, addiction, of areas of concerns for most communities in the social aspect. As Malcolm kind of said, water. You know, I just helped lead the community engagement for the class action $10 billion lawsuit for the clean drinking water on First Nations. So I was in about, of the 200 plus, which is a staggering number, 200 plus First Nations don't have clean drinking water out of the 634. I was in about 150 of them last year. Don't ask me what my calendar looked like. But it's interesting to see firsthand, and not many people really get that. So areas of concern, I kind of want to go to you, Duke, since I think you've led and been a part of a lot of, you know, leading in your community. Those you've seen it firsthand, how you have to address those issues. Can you talk about those areas?
Yeah, I guess, thank you, Joanne. One of the things that I continue to observe is clearly the lack of a relationship, and I'm going to harp on that because that's what I see, and that's what I continue to experience. One of the areas, and Stephen has indicated his casino, the court, but we've had to use the courts in order to compel each level of government to sit with us at a table. So that's the reality, is that they're not coming based on the nation-to-nation relationship that was established by our ancestors. All the resource extraction that happens in this country is on treaty lands. So the sooner that we come to that realization, the sooner that we can start having the real conversations to change the circumstances of not only our communities, but our regions, our provinces, and the country. And that would lead into some of the solutions that are necessary to address some of the social issues that are impacting our communities. We're dealing with legacy issues. They're not going to diminish themselves overnight. It's not going to take an approach to be tough on crime, because people do change after a period of time. Like there's barriers that exist for individuals to attain employment. They may be good with their children, but with a criminal record, they cannot participate in a school, even if that record was from 20 years ago. That follows them around for their life. So what opportunities are available to those individuals who have clearly paid their debt to society, paid their debt for their actions. Yet, the way the system works currently is there's continued barriers. And it's not only those very specific examples, but also the Indian Act itself. As a chief in my community for 10 years, it was one area that I did never even focus on. I was forced to run as an elected individual under its regulations. However, that was the only aspect that I was willing to allow my community to be administered under. So there's definitely room for conversations. There's definitely room for some of the changes. But in my personal view, it's really the change needs to be the perspective of how you view it also. Like the top-down approaches do not work. We need to build it up from the ground and have that discussion together. So I think there's some serious conversations that do need to be had in forums such as this, but also directly with the people that are affected. And that's one of the most important aspects, and that's why we get into situations of having the court to get people into the same room, because there's an unwillingness to sit down and discuss those very serious issues. Thank you.
Yeah, so you brought up parental rights, and obviously that's been a really tough conversation to have lately because it seems like it's being pulled in multiple different directions. Our premiers are trying to take policy approaches on it. And for me, I can't help but draw the parallels between Bill C-92 that's currently happening on our communities. So child welfare autonomy is being given back to our nations because it's been discovered, wow, turns out the state does not know what's best for our children. And the one day on Twitter, I was talking about this. I just want to raise my kids. I don't, and granted, there are absolutely times where there needs to be intervention, and our nations are currently building that capacity. What does that look like when we do need to intervene, and what looks best? But am I a bad mom for just wanting to raise my kids and know what's being talked about in the schools with my children? At the end of the day, it's like, I think I know what's best, and I would hope that I'm forming that relationship where they can trust me and they can talk to me, but it's like I'm going online and I'm seeing people that don't even have kids telling me that my 7-year-old should be making decisions for herself that she should absolutely not be making for herself. And I say that as a mom of a 7 and a 16-year-old. There's a wide age gap there between the two of them. And yeah, absolutely. So the parental rights thing, for sure, it's tough conversations. And I think as the government changes, we're going to see more of it. I think right now our federal government's a little scared to have that conversation, but they're taking the talking points where they can to obviously pit people against each other, and our premiers are doing whatever they can to just say, let's let people raise their kids.
I absolutely agree with your approach, because I think we have a little bit of experience of how state intervention into the family structures and how that's turned out. And I'm putting that very diplomatically.
I wasn't going to say anything.
But we've had a lot of experience in that way, in relation to having governments tell us how to raise our children. And it's really had an impact, not only on the vibrancy of the culture of our communities, but also how our family structures operate in our Anishinaabe communities. Our language was diminished, our cultures were ignored, and we were legislated to be assimilated. And that's something that it's still being taught in the school systems. We're having trouble in our own community school structures and administration in changing the curriculum to allow for our own heroes to be celebrated, to be learned about, because we do have our own. We do have our own, like Tecumseh, Pontiac, Buffalo,
Big Bear, Pound Maker.
So there's many different types of leaders that are important to our people that our own children could learn about, including their own parents and grandparents. So these are what you may seem like simple things, but they're systemic, and changing the systems that are applicable to our children are the conversations that need to happen.
Yeah, sorry, I just want to add to that. In terms of an area of concern, I guess more from the legal lens again, what I see and what I find frustrating in my practice. And I sit at treaty tables. I sit at industry negotiations. I do a lot of that. And when you look at what's going on in the States, they don't have Section 35 of the Constitution there, right? And yet they're in many instances thriving, right? There's a lot of buzzwords that go around. Talk about reconciliation, right? And you hear these words ad nauseum, I might add. And there's all kinds of acts that get passed, but at the end of the day, if it's all semantics, right, and there isn't a lot of way of follow through, what's it worth, right? So for me, that's a big problem, right? Because you keep hearing about reconciliation. You hear the nation say, we don't want reconciliation, we want reconciliation. So I just think collectively, and I blame the Crown, industries, I'd have to say, is quite good to deal with in my experience. They just want to pay, they want to pay the rents once, and they say, right? They don't want to pay rents twice. But the governments, on the other hand, I'll give you a practical example. So in a treaty negotiation context, in British Columbia, most of the land is unceded. And the government's passed, they call it triple R policy. And this policy is supposed to bring about an equality of bargaining power between the parties. And yet, they come to the table, they'll have the secret meeting, and they'll come in with a predetermined budget, right? An allocation of land or, access to timber, et cetera. Well, what's the point of having that policy where you say it's going to be an equal positioning of bargaining, and yet you just go back to your old Indian Act ways? Mm-hmm. So, if Canada's serious about being more progressive on the Indigenous front, more than just, kind words and legislation that hardly anyone can interpret, then it is time for some action. It's time for some serious restitution, right? A bringing together of the nations and all Canadians so that Canada can get on with more productive GDP and providing food and housing for everyone, right?
So let's build on that, the Aboriginal treaty rates, but also renewed fiscal relationship. I think that's something that this government really needs to focus on. So I'll look at my friend Buff over there when we talk about the Indian Act and the renewed fiscal relationship. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it'll stay the way it is for a number of years until we come up with a formula. And I think regionally, you got to go across this country. As you can tell, we're all different in our own aspects, but some ideologies and methods of going forward might be a little different. And if this government is to go across this country and find out what's the best way to get away from the Indian Act, ultimately the only thing I see is that we have to be involved in the resource sector in all aspects, into the mining and what have you. I'm not saying has to be renewable energy, but there's something there that would help us get away from that. And right now, not only with the federal government, but I keep harping on the industry, they have a duty and responsibility. The one constant in the algorithm of success is Indigenous communities aren't going anywhere. I'll say it again, we ain't going anywhere. So when you have an idea, when there's a business opportunity and you look at the resource for extraction or whatever, it's imperative that partnership now is a constant. When before, I know it is treated as a variable, those Indians are in the way. But no, we're not going anywhere. We're going to be a part of it. And again, industry has really opened the door, in my view, in our context, where my wife and I are proud to be part of the Canadian Energy Executive Association. Used to be called the Oilmans. We have a conference coming up in Banff in August 23rd. I hope you guys can attend. There's great discussions that happen there. And it's really in support of this natural resource sector that is so imperative to this country. And the financial relationships, we have our own governance to take care of. And there's opportunities coming more and more every day. And the hard part is that we have to disclose everything to this government to show them, but there's a fiduciary duty or responsibility as long as the Constitution stays the same. And it has to be better. It just has to be better for our communities. A lot of our chiefs and our leaders manage poverty. We should be managing wealth. Like I said, 22 billion from Alberta going to Ottawa. And we get pennies on a dollar in a communistic system. I call it soft communist under the Indian Act. Doesn't work. And if you have any influence on any of your favorites, your MP, or even Pierre, you tell them that. The Indian Act doesn't work for First Nations. How do we make it better?
So I recognize we're sitting between you
No,
and
we
Emil,
keep
but
going.
yeah. So Indigenous vote, the opposition focused a lot on that in the last election. I think that it became really relevant of how many actually showed up for that election. So what is your opinion on today's Indigenous vote? Where do you think it's leaning? Where are you leaning? Could you kind of go into that? And I'll go to you, Jen, first.
Yeah, I saw you
know
looking directly at me. Yeah, I published an article in the National Post last year called "No Political Party Owns the Indigenous Vote," and anyone that knows me or follows me knows I'm a staunch advocate for self-determination. My biggest thing, and I'm just going to say it, there's a whole bunch of people that now exist in this country, and they get online and they sit in rooms and they genuinely feel like they own us and they know what's best for us. And at the end of the day, you're not paying my bills. You didn't work as hard as I did to get where I am today, put yourself through university, buy a home, raise your kids. I don't need to take advice from you. And it's not just about Indigenous issues. Indigenous issues are absolutely important. I want to know what my federal government is doing on Indigenous issues, but everything this federal government does here in Ottawa, which is what I tell people, there's decisions being made on that Parliament Hill, and they affect us. Taxes, all of it. If interest rates go up on mortgages, guess whose mortgage payments go up? Mine do. So it's like, I don't need people that have never lived a day in the life in my shoes to tell me what is best for me. I'm gonna make that decision for myself. And it's always, reconciliation, that's all we do is we talk about reconciliation. We talk. And honestly, I can drive to my city, if anyone knows where I live, and I have never seen a homeless population like that in my entire life. And I live in a predominantly Indigenous community, and that's a problem. And then you go online, people say, oh, well, it's provinces. It's a trickle-down effect. As Indigenous people, we are a federal responsibility, quote unquote. And it's the worst I've ever seen. So I'm sorry, but the Liberal Party will not be getting my vote in the next election, nor have they ever.
Thank you.
Well, back home we have some work to do. In our communities, we have some work to do. And the advocacy of these political parties really need to step up. And all it takes is a handshake. And coming to meet our people, coming to be part of our celebrations, some of our community festivities and what have you. I always challenge people that are non-Indigenous that you could be part of the Himoke tribe. And if you don't know what that is, these are the lawyers, the consultants, the accountants, CEOs of companies that have actually built a relationship with the chief, the elders, the community is welcome. Because when he or she walks into the chief and council chambers and the elder says, hey, who's the white guy? And the chief will say, him okay. But that means a lot. I'm saying? It's about relationship. When we take off the tie and we just talk and have tea together, it goes a long way, right? And that's kind of what we advocate for, is that relationship. Because that relationship, believe it or not, you're treaty people too. You're descendants of treaty people. And we're trying to follow the treaty and sharing the land. We have a duty to take care of the land and benefit from the land. But we all have to do it in harmony.
Thank you. Duke, anything? Yeah. Don't worry, I won't ask you where you vote. I already put you on the political spot.
Yeah, you
Sorry about
already
that.
told people that I ran for the last federal election. So. But I did that for a very specific purpose, as you noted. When the current sitting member showed up to the birthday celebrations, community events. However, was a member of the wrong party. They were not in government. They cannot influence some of the changes that are needed, or they're not in the rooms where those conversations are being had. So we've gone through this for a number of years, for probably 15 years prior to that election of the same individual. Great person, she okay. However, just not in the conversations to be able to make the meaningful changes that are necessary for not only my community, but those other First Nations and municipalities that in our region. So the day before the election period was starting, there was still no candidate for the party. So I said, well, I'm just going to put my name in. I'm going to tell them, yes, I'll do it. I'll put my name forward. And I did it for the well, I guess it's 3 reasons. One is there were some issues in my community that required the attention of the provincial and federal governments. I needed to elevate those based on my participation within this election. And secondly, the treaty issues that my community and other communities across the country were experiencing, because once I announced that I was running in the federal election, I instantly got calls from across the country from my peers, chiefs, and other leaders, indicating to me that should you get in and be successful, they should be naming you one of the ministers to represent the interests at Indigenous Services or Crown Indigenous Relations or Ministry of Natural Resources. And I said, yes, great idea. Please offer even that support if I do get elected and I'm named in those positions. But that's the reality, though. Like, we do have to participate. Yeah. And I think that is one of the things I've come to recognize. If we're not participating as an Anishinaabe or Indigenous person, sometimes our views do not get elevated to where they should be, because it is our homes that are being impacted by the decisions where the elected representatives are participating in. So I think it's important for not only Indigenous people to put their names forward, regardless of which party they represent, because each do bring good policy. It's too bad they all can't get together to make a fulsome commitment to addressing society's issues. However, we know there's reasons for that, but I think it's important for all of us to truly get our voices heard in whichever way possible. Miigwech.
Yeah, so the way I'd answer that, your question, Jovan, would be to say that I think the Conservative Party and platform is attracting more and more Indigenous support. I've been working as a lawyer with nations for approximately 20 years now, and I've actually seen with my own eyes a steady progression in that direction. The reason for it is as the nations set up more economic development arms, and as they become more entrepreneurial and out from the control, as Steve Buffalo says, of from under the thumb of the Indian Act, it's the natural human spirit, right? To want free enterprise and to want to provide, as was stated earlier, for your family and to better yourself, right? Better your family. So yeah, I see that as sort of a broader pattern. And I also want to just point out, we heard our future Prime Minister Pierre Poilievre speak yesterday, and the movement that he's created, I think it's populist, and new people are joining the party and are supporting the Conservative movement because of, well, just to circle back to your first question, what's it like? Like, as I was listening to Pierre yesterday, I was just thinking about my poor wife's heard this story too many times, but when I'm doing some of the grocery shopping, right, and I'm picking up the pack of berries that are $10, I'm thinking to myself, if I can barely afford this, I can only imagine what the average Canadian, right, is going through. And you know what? That's also exacerbated on reserve, right? You heard Duke and Steve, speak, about the conditions of what it's like, and I think that's one of the reasons why the Conservative Party is attracting more and more Indigenous voters.
Thank you all. So, any final comments, as we kind of wrap this up, other than that Buff leads the him/she tribe and all peoples are welcome? Any final comments, any final words as we kind of close? And as we say that, I also, again, want to emphasize, I think we all really thank you for staying through your meal to listen and learn, and genuinely appreciate it.
Yeah, I actually just wanted to say thank you to the Canada Strong and Free Network for having this. We were talking backstage. I don't know if you guys remember the Liberal convention that happened late last year. and it hit the media that an Indigenous woman at this conference had to go up to the podium and the mic and say, you know what, like this is supposed to be a room full of like reconciliation and progressiveness. And she had gone up to the mic and she said, last night, you know, after everything was done, the drinks started flowing, people started drinking, and she said, and the racism started flowing. And what I can say is I've went to the Conservative Convention, I've spent the last 3 days here, and people have been so welcoming and so kind, and just listening to what we have to say, this is literally reconciliation in action, so.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, you know, going forward, obviously there's...
Never ask, is there anything else you want to say to an Indigenous panel?
You know, lastly, you know, we came here to advocate to stop the carbon tax with some chiefs. We met with Freeland staff, and, you know, I met the chief of staff is from London, England, who's been here for 8 years. And he had no idea what the Indian Act was, nor our treaties. And the bureaucrats that he brought in the room, again, also did not have that history. And it's sad that it's being implemented and forced upon us. You know, the chief of Frog Lake, the chairman of my board, and I want to acknowledge Chief Duke is also on my board. Frog Lake, he explained, said, look, the situation is so dire that some of the single moms that are on assistance, social assistance, can't afford to feed their family. And they choose to buy food as opposed to buying feminine products for themselves. So the leader has to take the initiative to find extra money somewhere to accommodate, you know, that need that every mother needs, you know. So hopefully, you know, we can come to a head here and find a way to really challenge this in the right way to make sure that, you know, it's to me, it divides the classes. When they talk about that 20%, that's our communities, that's us. And you see it downtown here. You see every city, you know, the social conditions are getting worse. There's no hope in our communities. And this tax does nothing to save the environment. So, you know, yeah, that's one thing going forward. I hope we can all come together. You just need to understand, when our people stand up and you see a rally or you see a protest or something, there's a reason behind it. You know, and you have to just be open and not so negative to, those damn Indians. No, we were fighting for something that was promised that we want. Just change your mindset a little bit. I don't know how you grew up and who taught you some of the negative things that might come across in your life, but understand we do not want to be dependent on the federal government for money. Understand, we want to do it our way. We want our communities to flourish, our cultures to grow, our language to continue to be strong. Support that. Thanks.
I echo the comments from both previous speakers, and like my life's work as part of my responsibilities of working with our treaty in the area is that there's very specific obligations as a result of the nation-to-nation relationship. So stop fighting us, because the wording was very clear in these documents, especially in the Robinson-Huron Treaty one, where it says that the Crown is obligated to increase the annuity for the benefit of the communities as profits are generated from settlement and development within the territory. Yet, in our area, we've seen for quite close to 100 years where mining activity has taken place. We see the quarterly business reports of how much dividends are provided and profits have been generated. And these are staggering numbers. Billions upon billions of dollars for years. These are resources that have been generated. It's proven. They're publicly available documents. Yet, the Crown governments, provincial and federally, continue to fight our people. And all we're asking for is honor the agreements as they've been understood by our ancestors and why they entered into them. Miigwech.
I'll conclude briefly just by saying that, thank you for sticking around and listening to the speakers. And I would just ask that if you do sit on a board, please take back to the board some of what you heard today. And if you don't sit on the board, that's okay too. Take it back to the dinner table. That's I think what needs to happen. There needs to be more discussion, more understanding, so that we can, truly have the reconciliation that everyone talks about.
Great. Thank you, Miigwech.